We are at war. Not an operation, not rounds, but at war.
The 2024 Republican presidential primary field is taking shape.
The battle lines are becoming clearer, and so is the field of candidates.
Is the odds-on favorites, if you look at the polling, still Trump versus Biden?
That seems to be it, but it's just way too early to tell.
I'm more angry now, and I'm more committed now than I ever was.
Big challenge for these candidates is going to be how do they navigate Donald Trump? And how do they navigate Ron DeSantis?
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny.
Welcome back to the Ruthless Variety program. Fellas, I'll be frank with you. I would love nothing more than to have a lighthearted, fun episode again. We did kind of a serious episode at the end of last week, and I feel like our best stuff is making fun of each other, making fun of all of our politics, and, you know, generally having a good time. But it's hard to do that with the backdrop of what's been going on in Israel over the last weekend. The state that we find our country in, both in response to what's happening and just sort of generally.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very tough time. I think, like you said, those two joined ideas of the horror of the massacre, which takes place in Israel, followed by seeing the horror of the response among essentially the left in the United States, where you saw rallies in support of the terrorist attack in every major city in the United States.
Yeah, and you got Joe Biden out there calling a lid, by noon on Monday. And you get this sense that, like, we're sort of listless as a country. Like, you don't feel like we're in a position where we have leadership that can answer clearly to what America should do. And, I mean, that's the most troubling thing for me. Is I feel like our country itself is in a really bad state as well.
Yeah.
Well, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are projecting anything but strength, but it's certainly hard to imagine a more sobering progression of events from what we saw for this entire weekend. I mean, you guys all woke up to the same thing that I woke up to on Saturday morning, these videos starting to trickle out of Israel of these attacks over the southern border. And it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. Every single video that came out about the barbaric savagery from Hamas and their terrorists, it's one of the worst things that I think we've ever seen on social media.
Yeah.
What's played out in the south of Israel over the weekend.
I was seeing some specifics that cable news was covering. They didn't show the details of it, but across Israel, there are essentially these concrete shelters that have to be readily available for the public because they're so frequently under rocket fire that, hey, it's I'd say just like, a 10-person phone booth, except it's made out of concrete, essentially. So any moment, if a rocket attack happens, you pull over the car, you run in there, you take cover. And Hamas, knowing this apparently, would drive their trucks up to there, find the 10 or 12 people huddling in there, and just shoot all of them. Yeah. Which is just, horrific. Just just staggering inhumanity that you can just eye to eye with kids and families and just kill them all.
Yeah, what did it for me was watching video from a music festival in Israel for peace. Music festival for peace, and there's video from people's mobile phones as terrorists in, gliders come in with guns to murder them. Like, think about that.
Nightmare.
Well, dude, the whole thing was awful. I mean, there was an old woman who was living in a kibbutz near the southern border in Gaza, and these terrorists broke into her house, took her iPhone, and used her iPhone to film them murdering her, and then uploaded her murder to her Facebook account.
Jeez.
Think
Which
about
is how
that.
her family finds out. I think, look, there's always been evil in this world, and for anybody who over the last few years has lost sight of the fact that Hamas is a terrorist murder organization, and you're obviously reminded of that. But it feels like in years gone by, we always felt some comfort in knowing that the United States was always clear-eyed about how to respond to things like this, and that we always had, despite our differences over domestic policy and all kinds of things, that we were basically mobilized to support not only Americans abroad, which in this case, we've got at least 9 Americans that were killed in this attack by Hamas, but also our allies like Israel, knowing that it's been a beachhead for freedom in the Middle East in a pretty difficult territory. And there are groups like Hamas and Hezbollah are funded by Iran that seek to do damage to our allies in the United States every day. And we felt like you always had that, post-Reagan sense about this country, where if anything was put up against the United States or our allies, that you were going to get a hell of a response.
Yeah,
and I don't have any confidence in the world that we're there now. And part of that is what you guys said earlier. If we want to just flip up on the screen, still number 1, the White House, as all this stuff is going down, this is Monday. Monday, they send out a pool report saying that this dude is calling a lid before noon. And then they say, as this is going on Saturday, they were having a barbecue.
Yeah. I mean, that's it's absolutely horrific.
At the White House.
The fact that this is after the administration has learned that Americans have been killed, and an unknown number, they've confirmed that Americans have been taken hostage by Hamas and taken back to Gaza. After learning this administration has a party.
I mean, I just...
There was a time when presidents would be called on by the media, by both parties, to resign if they did something that incredibly beyond insensitive, but just, it's un-American.
Well, it's also, dude, just cancel the fucking staff party. Get your head in the game. The world is on the brink of war. We're talking about not just the south of Israel, but the breaking news as we're talking right now is that they're evacuating northern Israel because Hezbollah is firing rockets into the north, and so there may be war with Lebanon. So Israel is on the front of a potential 2-front war. There's a carrier strike group that is headed to the Mediterranean. That means that Americans are headed into harm's way in one fashion or another, and Joe Biden is hosting a barbecue? Like, get out of here.
Yeah.
He's too old. He's not fit to be president. His vice president is not smart enough to be vice president or president.
Well, the only thing we heard from her was sending out statements on indigenous people.
She sent out some tweet on the Indigenous People Day, and it's like, Earth to fucking moron. Get your head in the game.
Yeah.
The world is burning. Do something. You know what I mean? Like,
Americans have been killed and taken hostage.
We're in a country of 330 million people. We may not agree with every single one of them, but there is certainly somebody smarter and better equipped to run this place than either of them.
And that's part of what frustrates me about this is because we watched all the bullshit last week in the House of Representatives. Based on the last year and a half, but really emphasized this weekend on the barbecue and calling a lid for the president at noon on a Monday while all this is going on, you're not going to get leadership out of this White House. You're not going to do it. The track record of Afghanistan and what happened there, and their seemingly indifference to Americans being trapped in an incredibly impossible situation. Their indifference to allies in the war on terror being put in a place of potential execution. They're giving over American treasure and hard-fought land, including weapons that may or may not have been used against the Israelis here, all in the context of Afghanistan. We know that they're not capable of doing this.
Yeah.
We know that.
There were reports coming out this weekend of Hamas people uploading video of them using weapons that had been left behind in Afghanistan.
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable. But then you take the back of last week and you see the House of Representatives throwing out McCarthy over a continuing resolution. Can you imagine? And McCarthy brought this up in a press conference that he did Monday, which I thought he did a pretty nice job of ironing in how small that effort was in comparison to the global events of the weekend. But can you imagine if the government was actually closed? Can you imagine if we didn't actually have funding for our men and women in uniform who potentially could be in harm's way, as you suggested, John? Like
50-50 proposition.
It's the stupid bullshit that if you are an enemy of the American people, but more globally an enemy of freedom and Western civilization, this is a perfect time to hit. This is the perfect time to hit, because what confidence could you possibly have in the United States having cogent responses to what's happening right now? And then sure enough, 48 hours later, here we are. We're still sitting here. The president, how is it that Joe Biden has not gotten behind the desk and done some kind of
that is stunning.
Explanation?
That's stunning.
As to what it is that people are seeing on their TV, right?
America's been murdered and taken hostage, and you're 100% right. Every other president would have called the station and said, "I need some time. I need some TV time. I'm going to talk to the American people directly." And he instead throws a party.
The two possible explanations for why he hasn't gone behind the podium. One, he's physically incapable of doing it and delivering a message forcefully that the world will respect. Two, Democrats are conflicted on Hamas.
That's right.
Yeah.
Obama hasn't released a statement. Bill Clinton hasn't released a statement.
How can you be conflicted on Hamas? I don't understand. Like, conceptually, I have wrapped my mind around the insanity of the left. I understand things I shouldn't be able to understand about their perverse world ideology. I will never, under any circumstances, begin to understand how it is you could be conflicted about something like that.
Well, because these, I've talked about these Ivy League fail sons refuse to acknowledge the Iran deal was a mistake. These people will never acknowledge they made a mistake because I'm so smart. I'm so smart. Everyone always told me I get a gold star on my paper. I'm the smartest kid. So they can't, in their brains, conceive I could be wrong. The Iran deal was a bad idea when Obama did it, and we saw it resulted in mayhem. And then Joe Biden, when he's running, says, the first thing I'm going to commit to do is bring back the Iran deal. And then you see it in front of you.
And they just unfroze, $6 billion in cash for the Iranians?
Mm-hmm. And remember, the first Iran deal, which happened during the Obama administration, was it tantamount to us literally just delivering pallets of cash to Iran with some sort of wink and nod deal that they wouldn't continue to develop nuclear weapons. And they were like, great work, guys, everybody, we've really done. And it was immediately extremely controversial. And of course, Trump rightly reversed ourselves out of that. But you're right. From day one, the Biden administration wanted to get back in this. And what's happened over the last few weeks is they did get back in this. And if we can play clip 2, Wolf, let's just set the table on this deal.
You insist the Iranian regime won't touch the $6 billion of Iranian funds being unfrozen. But isn't it true that this frees Tehran up to spend more on other nefarious goals like supporting terrorism and boosting its nuclear program?
Well, to the degree that they continue destabilizing activities, and it's, I can't predict what they'll do going forward here, but we already have pressure in place on Iran, both through sanctions and through our military presence in the Gulf region. We won't hesitate to take additional actions as we see further destabilizing activity by.
I mean, you see how impossible it is for them to try to defend their foreign policy in the current environment. That what they've basically done again is send a bunch of money to Iran for hostage negotiation. We learned a long time ago you don't negotiate with terrorists because it turns out that terrorists take those negotiations and then capture more American assets and ask for more things.
And they used it to fund proxy wars across the Middle East and fund Hezbollah, fund Hamas, fund rebels in Yemen. And then, on Monday, Iran is talking about how they're going to use all these assets to attack Israel. And it's like, well, Obama did that. Biden did that.
They did that.
So it's not even just indifference. Holmes, you'd said basically indifference to our allies. I mean, I think, the people that are running Joe Biden's foreign policy, as Smug often says, the C team from the Obama days of the same worldview of how to deal with Iran as a counterbalance to Saudi Arabia. And I think what you're seeing here is the fruits of all of that work. They've strengthened Iran. They gave them all of this money, and now they're a threat to Israel. But Obama's been undermined Israel when he was president of the United States.
Literally.
I mean, his team went over there in 2015 to try to unseat him. A lot of people, if you're listening to this, you may not remember this, but Barack Obama and the Democrats did in Israel in 2015 what they all claimed Russia did in the 2016 election.
Yes.
They, through the State Department, spent all of this money through this nonprofit, like I think it was called One Voice, to register voters, and then they laundered all that voter file data to basically this super PAC called V15 that was run by Jeremy Bird, Obama's campaign manager, to try to unseat Netanyahu, unseat an ally.
Yeah.
And it's like, with friends like these.
Oh yeah, totally. But the whole thing is just completely back-asswards, and now you begin to understand why it is that such an atrocity can happen live on your television set, and yet there is zero leadership coming from the Democratic Party or this Democratic president of the United States, because they're inherently conflicted on all of this. Let's play clip 3.
What do you say about the argument that money is fungible? So Iran may have known this money is coming and used other funds to help fund this attack that happened.
Iran has unfortunately always used and focused its funds on supporting terrorism, on supporting groups like Hamas, and it's done that when there have been sanctions. It's done that when there haven't been sanctions, and it's always prioritized that. And again, I come back to the proposition that these funds have always been, under the law, available to Iran to use for humanitarian purposes.
So why the fuck would you give him the money?
Yeah.
Why would you give him the money? Why would you do it? I mean, this is just like, I feel like I'm losing my, it's always been the case? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, we sent $6 billion over. No, it's a good chance that it actually goes and fund terror and actually attack our allies. Oh, no.
I guess there's nothing we can do.
Oh, throw up our hands.
Yeah.
Ah.
And again, like, what a contrast. You've got Obama and Biden administrations on the same page, basically, of coddling Iran.
Yeah.
You've got Trump in the middle, and you have the prime example of Iran through Qasem Soleimani, who they're funding his efforts to go straight up just kill Americans. Roadside bombs wherever Americans are, in Iraq especially. So many American soldiers are dead as responsible of as a direct result of what Qasem Soleimani and Iran were doing. And Trump turns the dude into salsa. He hits him in an airstrike. And then, we were told by the media, we were told by the Democrats, oh God, here's how World War III starts.
No, it turns out they just shut the fuck up.
Bingo.
And that's what happens. That's what America used to be in the world. That's why the rest of our allies and our enemies used to look at the United States and say, like, look, we hate everything about them, but like, let's be a little careful about how far we go on some of these things, because you never really know if they're going to get engaged. And if they do get engaged, we got a big problem here. I think they're looking at the world right now and they're saying, I don't think they're going to do anything.
But it's not just the world they're looking at. Look at what's happened under Obama's administration, under Biden's administration, as in terms of immigration. Everything that we are seeing overseas can happen here in America.
Yeah.
We saw over the weekend all of the terrorist sympathizers who were out in New York and other cities around the country to rally in support of the murders of these Jewish families. And there were like the front of
Let's put up still number 2. This is what you're about to talk about.
The front page of the New York Post this morning has a picture from one of these rallies where they're literally holding a Nazi symbol and they're chanting death to Jews. They're not asking for a 2-state solution.
No.
Right?
Right.
They're not asking for peace in the Middle East.
Right. When they say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, they actually just mean the eradication of Jews in Israel. That's what they mean. That's what they mean.
They just hate Jews. And so what we've seen over the course of the Biden administration is an influx of people from the southern border who are not just Guatemalans and Mexicans trying to find a better life working on farms. You have people who have actually been discovered who are marked by our security authorities as potential terror targets. People from all over the world are working their way up. And we know if they're out at a rally in New York, they're in communities all across the country ready to move on a moment's notice.
Let's play clip 5 while we're talking about it, because this is from that rally in New York.
There was some sort of rave or desert party where they were having a great time until the resistance came in electrified hang gliders and took at least several dozen hipsters.
They're literally cheering the death of people who are just at some concert.
A music festival for peace. Again, I stress, for peace.
And to remind folks, there's Americans who are murdered.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, it's just freedom fighters going after some hipsters. Like
the resistance.
And that is
unbelievable.
part and parcel. The left.
But that speech was not in Tel Aviv. That speech was not in London. That speech was in New York City.
New York City. And that's the thing is the left, they want to minimize the humanity of their enemies, which is how they enable themselves to be like, we're justified to spend the summer of 2020 burning businesses to the ground. We're justified in burning down police stations. You know, we're justified in demanding we defund the police. Now they're saying we're justified. This is decolonizing.
Right. This is the slippery slope where they start and they're like, well, property crime isn't violence, and burning down a, police station, that's not violence. This is the, protest is it's what oppressed people do. And you can see a direct through line from that logic to what we see now.
Yeah.
It's okay to murder Jews because we call them colonialists.
Yep.
Right.
It's okay to murder Americans because we call them the same thing.
That's it.
They're justifying fucking murder.
That's it.
These people need to be understood. We cannot we have to take them seriously.
Well,
we have to shut down the
and
border.
It's the creeping influence of the far left. I mean, you hear this sort of rhetoric from Rashida Tlaib, from Ilhan Omar, from
But
AOC.
that's the thing. It's not the far left. They're in Congress now.
Yeah, well, not only they're in Congress, but they're setting the agenda of this administration and the Democratic Party nationwide. And they try to pretend, like the Nancy Pelosi's of the world, try to pretend like they've got this locked up. Like they're not going to allow this to go too far. Of course, it's a part of the constituency. We kind of play nice with it, but we're going to keep a monitor on all of this. Well, as you can see from these protests, it ain't locked up. And from the election of people like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, it's not locked up. Like this is the perversion of the left and what it has become in this country, where you can open this entire discussion as if there is two sides of a story of a bunch of terrorists using hang gliders and machine guns to come in and murder innocent people, to rape and kill innocent women throughout the country, to kill elderly, to target children, to do all these things. And they're like, yeah, but let's look at the other side of that story. There is no yeah, but. Like, it is a time for absolute clarity. And we've done a good job as a country since our inception of having absolute clarity in moments like this. I'm very, very concerned.
Yep.
Based upon the complete hijacking of the left in this country by this element, that there is no clarity to be had here. And I worry a little bit about the only responsible party in this country, a Republican Party, that just threw out a Speaker of the House last week, who now the House, by the way, can't do anything about it. The rules of the House, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, is they have a Speaker pro tem that can't actually bring legislation to the floor. A lot of debate whether they can even condemn what's happened in Israel without a Speaker of the House. This week, they're going to try to sort that out. God willing, I hope they do. But you think about that argument and how small that is in comparison to what we're dealing with here and the element that we're up against politically in this country. This is not a time for Republicans to fuck around with dumb people and dumb things and conspiracy theories and stupid bullshit that throws us off our game. Somebody needs to protect the United States. Somebody needs to do the job. And right now, what we watched in the House of Representatives last week is incapable of doing the job. How can you not make the case that we're damn close to a failed state right now? You have a president of the United States that literally can't go out and do a press conference about our most important ally in the world. You got a House of Representatives without a speaker. I mean, if you're an enemy, like, what do you think about that?
It's been, like three days, and we haven't heard Joe Biden once say anything about Americans who've been killed and taken hostage by terrorists. I think that's unprecedented in the history of this country. You've never had a situation where you've had Americans murdered abroad and taken hostage, and now Hamas is threatening to execute them on live TV. Americans. And the President of the United States hasn't said a word. He threw a party, and then he called it a day before noon.
It's just like literally.
I mean, it's heartbreaking.
You can tell by our. I mean, look. We like to have a good time on this show, and believe me, we would much rather be laughing and having a good time than talking about stuff like this, but we're concerned.
We have very good reason to be concerned. And just back one more time on the idea that everything that you're seeing happening over there can happen here.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the amount of tech that the Israelis have. Think about the F-35s and all the third generation everything that they can use to just pinpoint and destroy an enemy on a moment's notice. Well, these terrorists walked, rode in trucks, and hang glided across a border where, there are a lot of questions that are still being answered about where was the manpower on the Israeli southern border. Some people say that they had redeployed troops over to the West Bank and they just didn't have as much manpower. My point is borders are susceptible to these sorts of weaknesses. And if we don't get our own American border under control and we don't get serious about the small things, all of the F-35s and Lockheed weapon systems in the world will not protect people who are vulnerable to interpersonal combat.
Well, we saw that 9/11, right? And I can't believe we have to reteach this lesson. I can't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
This is just the world you live in. And if you keep fucking around and focusing on unimportant stuff, you're going to invite people who mean real harm to American citizens to do the worst. And that's what's happening here. But the thing that you guys brought up that just like sticks with me is this unwillingness to sort of mention the fact that Iran has funded all of these things. It has to be purposeful, right? I mean, they're so committed to these deals with Iran that they block out the sun in terms of what's happening. And if you could play, Wolf, if you can play clip 4, this is Jake Sullivan with just the most unbelievable quote.
What we said is we want to depressurize, de-escalate, and ultimately integrate the Middle East region. The war in Yemen is in its 19th month of truce. For now, the Iranian attacks against U.S. forces have stopped. Our presence in Iraq is stable. I emphasize for now because all of that can change. And the Middle East region is quieter today than it has been in 2 decades.
Well, if you had absolutely zero intelligence capabilities whatsoever, I could see how you could make that mistake. I don't believe that. I just don't believe that you had a crew of hundreds of people assembling hang gliders and weaponry and pulling it out of Afghanistan, if that's what happened, and nobody had any idea that any of this was about to happen. Seems quiet. Maybe it's because they say that the greatest threat to the United States is climate change.
Yeah.
Right.
Not people with fucking AKs.
And I really loved the kind of like cognitive dissonance when I saw a bunch of these journos saying, how did Israel let their border become so like open? Like, don't they know that that's a very unsafe situation?
Yeah.
Like, they're like, shouldn't someone be held accountable that the border was able to be like penetrated? So let's take a look at the South of the United States, where the border is wide open, and you folks have said that these, we have to welcome these people, and the Statue of Liberty says we need an open border, and we've been told that you're actually a racist if you believe that the southern border should be secured. And we had the statistic come out where in the month of February this year alone, we had more people on the terror watch list try to enter this country than we did in the previous 4 years that we had Donald Trump. I mean, that alone should tell you, like you've been saying, Ashbrook, how dangerous this environment is. When you have an open border, it can happen here.
There's also this like reflexive urge from these folks on the left to sort of preempt the discussion with blaming Israel itself.
Totally.
It's like, yeah, that border looked pretty porous.
Yeah, oh boy.
It's like, how short was Israel's skirt? It's like, let's blame the victim.
No, I mean, it's true.
Yeah,
that is basically what they're trying to do here, and they're somehow this is Israel. Like Israel's done something here,
like Iran,
to provoke.
The Wall Street Journal has evidence now that Iran funded and helped plan these attacks, for Hamas to pull off. And meanwhile, the mainstream media is trying to be like, okay, so now we have evidence that Iran and Hamas are working hand in hand to commit these terrorist attacks that killed Americans and hundreds of people, and how are we going to blame Israel for this?
Right.
So let's talk about Israel. It must have been them who did it.
I worry about our ability to respond to stuff like this, like you pointed out, Holmes. I'm less concerned with the Israeli people's resolve.
Oh,
you know?
I'm not.
Like,
people don't understand.
They don't understand.
No.
I was over
They
there.
are very, very, very committed.
I was over there in 2015 for Netanyahu's campaign for that snap election. And I think what struck me most being there is like how the threat of violence just becomes part of life.
Ugh.
And these people like just sort of persevere through it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, like there's a resolve that the Israeli people have in their land to preserve it and fight it and defend it. And it's just, it comes to you in the most simple ways where like, yeah, you go around the, the old city in Jerusalem and like you're outside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and there's like bomb disposal devices. That's like, you're just sort of like tootling around, taking tourist photos and
Could
stuff.
never conceptualize.
You can never
that.
conceptualize that really like living where we do. So I think as Americans, you don't have that sense of it unless you've been there where like you can be in central Tel Aviv and like you're in a 7-Eleven, like, there's a 22-year-old with like an M4A1 carbine on his back and like they're ready at any time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just the 22-year-olds. We were seeing stories online over the weekend of these guys 60 and 70 years old just driving their Toyota Echo or whatever the 4-door car they had down to the side of the road near the southern border, parking on the side of the road and joining up.
I saw the video of Naftali Bennett, a minister in the government, just reporting for reserve duty.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's because it's existential.
Yeah.
And I think Netanyahu's done a really incredible job over the years of trying to educate the free world on the existential crisis that they face every day and understanding that the people who, everybody thinks you can just sort of coexist with and we could figure out 2-state solutions if we talk nicely together and all of these things. That the reality that they live under is that this is what we saw last weekend is an inevitability periodically. And whenever they get an opportunity, they're going to take that opportunity. He's explained it. The Israeli people understand this endemically.
Mm-hmm.
Like they live with that. And that is the part that I think is, I can't figure out why people don't wrap their head around that outside of that region.
Yeah.
I just don't get it because it seems to me like, how long do you need to watch before you understand that that's what they're going to do? And it's the most heinous stuff of all time. This isn't some territorial dispute.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about raping, killing children, murder. They're showing off while they're doing it. They're trying to make it as grotesque as possible to try to somehow show that they like want this more or something. And there's only one way to deal with that.
That same grotesqueness. I saw videos from that rally in New York where you had some of those folks holding up their phones because you had a bunch of folks counter-protesting in support of Israel, and then you saw at the rally the folks who were supporting Hamas were holding up their phones and showing videos of families being killed to try and dunk on them.
Yeah, like trolling them. Yeah. Yeah, with the murder
that's
of people.
the level of inhumanity
Yeah.
that the left has breached in this guise of this is like decolonization and that this is just, this is justice and equity in action.
Let's just I don't know if everybody listening is familiar with what this kibbutz life is like, that you're hearing a lot about how they rolled into these basically Israeli neighborhoods. And I've been to a kibbutz right on the Gaza border just a few years ago, and you could see from the edge of this neighborhood the fence that was separating Israel from Gaza. And it was, sort of a terrifying thought of how close Gaza was and how close the potential terrorists were to these very, very peaceful, normal people who are just going around their daily life. So in these neighborhoods, somebody is growing food for the community. Somebody is teaching the kids. Somebody works as a doctor. Somebody works fixing things around the neighborhood on the homes, the small, modest homes. These are very peaceful people. It's not like they have machine gun turrets sitting on the top of their houses.
Yeah.
And so they were sitting ducks for these Hamas terrorist cowards to roll in and just start spraying them with their machine guns. So like the idea that there is any courage involved in someone from Hamas rolling over a chain link fence and into a neighborhood is Like it is the most barbaric, murderous mindset that
There's
you
not
could
two
imagine.
sides to the
It's
story.
evil. It is just evil.
It is just evil, and there's not two sides to the story. But again, I think if we have one message to everybody who's listening to this, you can say, look, this isn't happening in my neighborhood, and why do I care about this and everything else? The reality is that the world is a pretty dangerous place, and we found out time or two over the last 50 years that it can come to our shores in a hurry. And it's not being a neocon to suggest that you got to pay attention to America's influence in the world, because the second that it walks away, you get amazingly horrible things that happen. Somebody fills that void. And who's filling that void right now are a bunch of countries that either couldn't care less about humanity or have horrible intent for Western freedom. And without having a powerful, serious United States on the world stage, you're going to have more and more of this. And do not think for 1 second that you are immune to it. It can come here. We learned that on 9/11. We didn't do much when they bombed the World Trade Center. We didn't do much when they bombed the Khobar Towers. We didn't do much when they hit the Marine barracks. We didn't do much when they took out the hotels and all of the sort of Western things across the Middle East. And then they flew planes into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And all of a sudden it became apparent to us because we lost loved ones that were directly connected to a whole bunch of us across this country. Well, that's the thing, guys, is that they tell you exactly what it is that they want to do. And they're doing it again right now. And unless you can figure out, both as a nation, but as Republicans, as your own party, to figure out how to be serious about this shit and have a serious functioning political party and serious functioning American government, we're going to have this come visit us sooner than later. And that ought to scare the shit out of everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I got to go back to just how appalled I was and remain at the fact of how our president is completely silent. Well, we've had Americans who were killed, Americans who were kidnapped, and it wasn't that long ago. I remember when we had Trump in the White House and ISIS took an American hostage. There's a SEAL team and a dog that chased the head of that organization until he was dead.
Yeah.
And ISIS is gone. They were completely destroyed, whereas they had almost completely taken Iraq when he had Barack Obama's foreign policy. This is Barack Obama's foreign policy part 2. You embolden Iran and you stick your head in the sand. That's their whole plan, essentially, and hope for the best, because all the Ivy League kids, I think they got the right idea. We're going to decolonize, and this is what you get as a result of it. Americans have been murdered and taken hostage, and our president does nothing.
You got all these student groups at Harvard and Columbia putting out, signing statements supporting Palestine and blaming all of the violence on Israel.
Yeah, they were saying that Hamas's actions are decolonization. 37 student organizations at Harvard. And then I saw Larry Summers being like, I'm shocked. How could this happen? Dude, you were president of Harvard. That's a training camp for this kind of thought. Like, academia is now lockstep with this idea of this like neo-Marxist idea of, I see every action in the world as oppressed versus oppressor. And it's, in my mind, it's essentially a civilization versus anti-civilization argument. That's all they want is open border. They want chaos. They're like, oh, well, burning businesses and houses and cities across an entire summer. Oh, they said, oh, the riot is just the voice of the unheard. This is actually justice. That mindset had taken grip of the left for a while. And now you see all these shocked leftists that the chickens have come home to roost of like, wait a minute. I live in New York, and why is there a large gathering in Times Square celebrating this terrorist attack? How could this have happened?
I mean, but this is why you got to listen very closely to this presidential primary. A lot of you may have made up your minds, and former President Trump has got a huge lead in the polls. He may very well be the nominee, but you ought to listen, because too often in recent years we've gotten sidetracked on stupid bullshit and stuff that ultimately is not going to make a difference in the overall life of of people in the United States, but also not going to make a big difference when it comes to just sort of global affairs and everything else. This is serious shit. Like, these are real, serious existential questions, and you need people with leadership qualities to be able to put together the right solution to get us through these times.
Mm-hmm.
You really do. And every 10 years, we're reminded in one form or fashion how serious shit can get, right? I mean, it was COVID in 2020. You had the financial crisis in 2008. You had 9/11. I mean, it's just, once a decade, we're reminded that your freedom not only is not free, it's not guaranteed at all. And if you stay focused on like what entertains you, and you stay focused on like what makes you laugh, or, you know, who put who in a cupboard, like that shit is fun, and we like to do it here on the program. But like, you really do need a sense of seriousness when you're evaluating who you're going to vote for here. Because this country with another term of Joe Biden, it ain't going to work. It ain't going to work. And I have real concerns about where it is that we go from here. I really do. But on that note, we should probably talk about what's happening this week with the speakers thing. Because I think these are intertwined. You saw McCarthy on Monday with a big speech about what he would do to address what's happening in Israel. I thought it was really well done. I thought, if nothing else, it really did minimize and make last week's events look so stupid. But he had a kind of a good layout. Problem is like none of that shit is achievable as long as the Speaker of the House is vacant in the House. Now, there's some conjecture about whether he would still want it or not, despite the fact that he said he's not going to run for it next week. I don't know what all that means. All I know is that they're convening this week, and this is according to CNN. The battle to win the House speakership could hinge on the contingent of more moderate Republicans, uneasy about the conservative politics of the two leading candidates and angry at the hardline faction for ousting Kevin McCarthy in last week's unprecedented floor vote. Behind the scenes, House Majority Leader Steve Scalise of Louisiana and House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan of Ohio have been making a direct pitch to centrist members, both insisting they will make re-election battles a priority and ensure more stability atop a badly divided conference. All right, so it seems like this thing is winnowing down a little bit. Are these the two? I mean, do we even know whether or not? I mean, presumably they're going to try to settle this Wednesday.
Yeah.
Are these the two candidates?
I don't know. Jim Jordan was endorsed by President Trump late last week. And so, that's going to have a lot of sway, I think, in, parts of the conference. And Scalise obviously was in leadership with McCarthy. And so he has a constituency as well. What I am concerned about, and Max Miller, who we had on last week, sort of alluded to
that was a great
this.
interview, by the way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I heard a lot of rave reviews.
He's a great guy. And it's just nice to see like a young guy in Congress who doesn't buy into all the bullshit, But what he had pointed out, is like, you can't end up in the same situation as McCarthy with this motion to vacate of a single member, or we're going to end up in this all over again sort of thing. And I am concerned that in like a fight to win over the undecideds in the conference, you end up cutting a lot of the same deals that McCarthy did, and you end up in the same position. That's my fear. And I think you guys mentioned that, when we did that episode last week as well.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I think that's very real. But you got to ask yourself at some level, if you're cutting deals like that, where you make a Republican speaker susceptible to 7 or 8 unhappy people at any one time, what's the difference? Why does a House majority matter?
Yeah.
It doesn't, because all you've done is allow for whatever Democratic priority become more significant. I mean, the only way that you get anything done at all is if you do it with Democratic votes, which is not the way the House works. The majority is supposed to be able to unify and drive an agenda.
Yeah.
And it's therefore, that's the leverage piece that you use against the Senate and the House to try to get conservative things done. And if you can't do that, so much so that you can't even have one person sit on top of the conference, my God. I mean, this is serious stuff we're dealing with.
Yeah. And I think it's even more important with the 2024 election coming up. Obviously, we talked a lot about the political implications of all of this for 2024, but I think people need to recognize, and we talked about this after the midterms, with redistricting, the way that the new district lines are across the country, this is not the Tea Party map of 2010.
Mm-hmm.
Like putting together a majority with 20 seats, 30 seats, 40 seats is going to be probably impossible, if not extremely, extremely difficult. It's just a different map, and we're stuck with it for the next decade. And so, like, in building a majority coalition in the House, like, we have to have that in our back of our minds at all times, that, like, you maybe have to govern with a 10-seat majority or a 6-seat majority, or where we find ourselves now. So whatever we do in this next, speaker vote fight, we got to realize if we don't solve this problem internally with like party unity, we're going to be dealing with it for the inevitable future.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And there's nothing the press loves more than the internal food fight. I mean, I noticed McCarthy's presser on Monday, which was about Israel and what the U.S. response to Israel should be. The first 4 questions were all about the speakership race.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be really interesting to see what comes of this House caucus meeting or conference meeting today. And, Jordan seemed to be getting a lot of support over the weekend, a little quieter from the Scalise camp. But there's broad speculation that neither one of them is going to have an easy path to 218 votes.
Mm-hmm.
Some people say, well, now with all of the uncertainty in the Middle East, maybe that brings Republicans together for sort of snap unity. I guess we'll find out later today and tomorrow when they have ultimately are supposed to hold the internal vote. So I obviously it's a very, very bad look. Republicans look completely disorganized, and I understand internal fights. I think conservatives deserve a bigger share of the pie, but like we have to get it together. You have to operate and act like adults who are responsible with power. Otherwise, voters will not give it to you.
And I think, just quick, I think it's no coincidence that the press, those are like the first 4 questions that they ask. And the reason that so many Democrats have been allowed to get a pass on either putting out, like the State Department put out multiple statements that get ratioed on Twitter because everyone's like, are you people insane? Being like, we want a ceasefire.
Yeah.
But the State Department saying they want a ceasefire and they get ratioed to hell. But the reason Democrats are allowed to be either silent or absent is because they can always try to point at like, well, they don't even have a speaker, guys. The inability of the conference to be united creates that excuse for Joe Biden, because it's not like you've got a Speaker of the House who's demanding that the president answer where the hell these American hostages are and how the hell are we getting them back? What's the plan? Because the American people deserve to know. We don't have a guy in the House who can do that for us right now.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I'm so glad you brought that up, because we all know that your corporate media is going to be against conservative causes from soup to nuts. They just are. They're going to take the Democratic line, and that's just what it has been. You can whine about it, you can cry about it, or you can kind of do something about it. And when they have the opportunity, like has been given to them here, to talk about the House of Representatives and a lack of a speaker, they don't have to talk about the ulterior side of this.
Exactly.
And the alternative is, like you said, you have a State Department that's sending out and deleting
multiple times
American foreign policy on the internet.
Oops, they goofed.
You got like 3 different members of the administration that are sending out and then deleting official discussion of what this administration is going to do about a world event that's occurring in real time. The president is eating pudding.
Right.
Yeah.
And you wonder why,
or barbecue. He's having barbecue.
You wonder why Russia and Iran and China see weakness in America right now. And look, there's a reason why Russia didn't go into Ukraine when Donald Trump was president.
Yeah.
That they're not, China wasn't saber rattling vis-a-vis Taiwan. And like Smug always says, he made Soleimani salsa.
Yeah.
Right? It's like the bad people in the world are like the velociraptors in Jurassic Park or the T-Rex testing the electric fence.
Yeah.
They're testing the fence for weakness all the time. And what America does in the world informs what they do.
Yeah.
So when you're putting up dog shit statements that are incomprehensible, and you can't defend it, and then having to delete it, and other people are doing the same thing. It projects that weakness on the world. America doesn't have moral clarity. They don't know where they stand.
That's just 100% right. That is 100% right. And there's such a short window when something like this happens in the world to do the right thing, to actually take clear-eyed action to ensure that it doesn't happen again. Because over time, these things, you get separated from the grotesque nature and the shocking nature of it all, and people begin debating again, and there's other things that come up, and you've got domestic concerns that outweigh it, and it sort of just minimizes your ability to communicate to the outside world what it is that your country stands for. And I think that's already passed. Like I maybe not. Maybe there's something the United States can do here in the short term that can help sort of put this back into perspective. But when you're doing barbecues and you're closing lids at noon on a Monday, you're just saying it doesn't matter to you. That's what you're saying. It doesn't matter to you. It doesn't matter to you that terrorist organizations that have wanted to destroy Israel, the United States, and all of our allies and everything in the Western culture since the beginning of time, that what they do when they do it doesn't matter to you anymore. That's what we've said right now. What possible other message could you have received if you're sitting at Hamas HQ right now?
Right.
I mean, it's really disappointing. And I hope we've got a bunch of presidential candidates here that can help communicate this in a way that our president clearly cannot currently. And we are limited in our ability to speak in a unified nature from a House of Representatives that is really the only other Republican mouthpiece.
One final thing I would say on that, because I don't want to discount some of the gripes that members of the conference have, or some conservatives. Like, a certain level of infighting is healthy, I think, for a political party and for our House majority. And like Max sort of alluded to it, like there's some stuff like deals that were made with steering committees and things like that, and there's always going to be a tension between leadership and rank and file, right? And you want the House to be as democratic and empowering as many of those rank and file members as you can, without it distracting from the overall mission of the conference writ large and speaking with one voice and having effectiveness.
Which up until last week, I thought they had done a terrific job of.
So we got to get back to that as soon as possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
For all the reasons that Smug mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Yep, I agree. Well, listen, I think we ought to wrap it at that. We're gonna play games. We're gonna have fun. God willing, we'll have a speaker on Thursday's episode. So, I mean, look, this is not going to be a permanent basis here on the Ruthless Variety program. We're not laughing and having a good time, but it's hard to have a good time when you've got all this going on in the world. I think we did it.
I think so. Thank you so much to the minions for listening. I hope all of you are joining me in praying for the Americans who are still taken hostage. So, until next time, minions, keep the faith, hold the line, and own the libs. We'll see you on Thursday. Stay ruthless.